Hi, can everybody hear me? We're doing something a little bit different this year. We're going to allow y'all to move forward a little bit, but hold on. The rules of this, of course, are no running, no trampling, no pushing, no shoving. And if you do any things, I have to call Pepsi and she will pull your badge. So with that said, nobody can sit in the green seats, but you can move forward into the yellow seats starting now.
Come on up. Don't be shy.
You're
starting your RTX weekend with us. Are you guys excited? I'm excited too. This is actually my first RTX. So why don't we start today with introductions, and we can start at the end of the table down there with Dan.
Hello, my name is Dan Hirons. I'm an editor here at Rooster Teeth. I've been here for about 1.5 years, I think. I've been an editor for 13 years. Before I came to Rooster Teeth, I had worked in a lot of television, and I'd done a lot of commercial work, done some work for CNN, A&E, History, Discovery, all sorts of those cable networks. Now I'm here working at Rooster Teeth, and yeah, that's about it.
And you love it.
I love it.
Hi everybody, my name is Adam Bailey. I am also an editor here at Rooster Teeth. And before this, I was just a freelancer for a couple of years after graduating college. I've worked on documentaries and features and a bunch of stuff. Not nearly the long list that Dan has here, but it's been cool. So, yeah, it's me.
Hey guys, I am Cody Gibson. I'm an editor. I've been an editor for 14 years. I've done a few feature films, some series, whatever else pops up, and now I'm at Rooster Teeth. And my sole purpose at this panel is to be the hype man. Yeah.
Not related to Blaine Gibson.
That's right.
I'm André Willette. I'm the VFX and motion graphics designer for live action.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Cody. See, it really works. Before I worked at Rooster Teeth, I was working in Chicago doing a lot of work for advertising. I did stuff for Nintendo, Pizza Hut, McDonald's, all your favorite fast food. Yeah, I've been at Rooster Teeth for a little over 1 year now. It's been a great time, doing lots of crazy stuff. Happy to be here.
Hi, I'm David Wynn. I'm the assistant editor here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your job. Yeah.
I've been an assistant editor for about 4 years. I've done a lot of television work with A&E and CNN. A lot of the shows Dan's worked on, and I swear, Dan, I'm not following you. And I've been here for about a little over 1 year, so yeah, I'm excited to be in here.
All right.
And I'm Allison Feldstein. I am the post-production producer. So I manage this team and our projects, and I'm very excited to be here. I've been in production for a little bit over 10 years, and I've worked in advertising and live broadcast and all sorts of fun stuff. And Rooster Teeth is the most fun because there's dildos and comedy and gaming. And it's
in the shorts.
Dildos.
Yes, on screen, not in the office. And I'm really excited that you guys have chosen to kick off RTX with us. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our department in general. So what is the live action post-production department? Well, let's start with live action. You guys saw a little reel when you walked in. Did anyone recognize anything that was on there? Did any of you watch maybe like 11 Little Roosters or some $1 Million Butt, maybe some RT Lifes, Immersion, all that good stuff? So that's the stuff that we work on. It means it's live action in the sense that we have Rooster Teeth talent, we have actors, there's live people, it's not animated, and that's all the kind of stuff that we work on. So we also cut trailers and do some less sexy stuff like delivery for places that are beyond Rooster Teeth. But the fun stuff that we do, really involves our staff and our talent and our creative team and is all original. And so the post-production portion means that we're getting it after it's been in production and we're editing it, we are doing finishing on it, we're doing sound design, color, all sorts of fun stuff that these guys are going to get into in much more detail. But post-production, even though it says after production in the title, we're actually involved before things go into production. So that means budgets, it means timelines, it means working with the creatives to figure out how to get that shot to look right, or they want a certain effect, they want to make something happen that's not really happening, how do they shoot that? And so we work on things like that. The typical story of one of our projects is that there will be a creative idea or a series that's pitched or something that's in the process, and we'll start in the pre-production phase. We'll figure out how many days they're shooting, how many cameras they're shooting. So something like RT shorts or $1 Million, but those are typically 1 to 2 cameras, and the shoot days are sometimes between 1 and 3 days. And the post-production time on those are generally about 2 weeks. And that includes our prep time, that includes our VFX, and kind of doing all of our finishing. So something like an immersion, that can have 20 plus cameras. And those generally have a much longer pre-pro time. It can be 6 weeks in pre-production and then another month in post-production, depending on all of the factors. And so those are much bigger projects. And we use 2 different types of NLE software. So we use Adobe and we use Final Cut X. And these guys are going to get into why they would choose either program. A lot of times it does have to do with how many cameras, what the director wants, what the editor feels more comfortable in. Each one has its own benefits and each one has its own disadvantages. And do any of you guys want to talk to the benefits or disadvantages or why you prefer one program over another for certain types of content?
X is actually the best. There's no downside.
Oh, Daniel, I didn't realize you were in this room.
Windows Movie Maker, buddy. No, I mean, I can actually, I guess, start us off with that. I do actually edit mostly in Final Cut X, despite its like terrible like start. It's actually become like a really nice program. I guess some of the downsides is like it's sort of hard to pick up after you know like Avid or Premiere, because it works very differently. And if you don't know how to use like the magnetic timeline, which if you don't know what that is, basically is always ripple editing. Like so there is no like just stop it right here. You have to like add in gaps and stuff like that. So it can be a little hard to handle. It can sometimes have weird quirks or not have like all the plugins that you need that like Premiere sometimes has baked in. You have to get like third-party stuff, but by and large I find the kind of like I guess philosophy behind it, where you're kind of like it's a constant stream of video, to be very helpful, like to kind of get in the mindset of editing. I don't know, like it makes me faster as well, I think.
Which types of projects does it make you faster? Every
For
type?
me, it's all of them, but I would say especially like I don't know, like I feel like immersions, because like a lot of immersions, like you're trying to find the story as you go, because it's reality, so it's like not always just like set in stone. So you want to be able to pick up like a section and move it around quickly in order to kind of like find a new story through that, where like that can be really hard with Premiere. Like I know if you've used Premiere before and you're trying to move large pieces around, it's like T, arrow, select all, space out, drop your next thing in, and that can be really time consuming. So
Cody, I feel like you were gonna.
Yeah, I love the organization in Final Cut X. I think it's really useful for things like documentary filmmaking or like reality, like Adam said. And I really love the multicam feature in Final Cut. I just feel like it works pretty well. I mean, I know that Premiere has the same feature, but I just like the way the multicam feature works in Final Cut X. And I know at first I really I denied the magnetic timeline, but once you learn how it works really well. So
I think we have an editor who likes Premiere.
Yes, I also like working in Final Cut X, but I don't know that I prefer it. I think last time I talked to you guys last year, I had not really taken on a lot of projects in X, and since we last talked, I've done quite a few in X, and while I feel really comfortable doing it, it's not my preferred, and a lot of that has to do with the level of control that I have over the software. I feel like Final Cut X is really great and makes certain things much faster, but there are elements that I'd like to control that the program kind of like, will assume that they know what's best, and those are things that I don't like to relinquish control on. So, my personal preference on a lot of projects is still Premiere, but it is really good to know both, and I've been open to that, and I think you guys as aspiring editors, if there are any in the audience, should sort of be open to the possibility of working with any of those or others. And there are a lot more. We talked a little bit about Avid, which we don't actually use. Resolve has a really interesting proposal with their new software, and they've had it for a little while. But there are others. I know Barb uses iMovie, and that's cool too. Just as long as you're doing projects, I don't think it matters much. It's really about like what you bring to that program.
Yeah, I mean, not being an editor for Rooster Teeth, but I studied a lot of editing. I taught myself how to edit in Sony Vegas, and then when I went to college, it was a mix of Final Cut and Premiere, and the principles kind of transfer across all of them. So once you know one, you're in a good position to move to the others as well.
Yeah, I think just kind of more on that. You don't like go out of a movie and be like, man, that was a Premiere movie, like you don't watch a video like that was definitely cut with like Sony Vegas. Like as long as it comes together in the end, nobody really cares.
But some programs do things better than others, and so you just choose which one you want to use based on, whatever program. Like I still like to do long format or feature films in Premiere because I feel like I know that workflow, but apparently people do edit Premiere, they do edit features in Final Cut X. Like they're cutting.
Rooster Teeth is cutting a feature in Final Cut X.
They're
right
cutting
now.
Laser Team 2 in Final Cut X. So if you want to know about that workflow, maybe go to the Laser Team 2 panel and ask Daniel all about it. But it can be done.
It can be done. And I think our editors are extremely nimble, able to flip between both. I will say when we work with third parties, it tends to disrupt the workflow if we're working in Final Cut X, I've found. But I think that it will get there, and there's ways to do it. Do you guys have any other thoughts on program choice while we're on it?
No.
All right. Some of the other things that we can talk about in the general aspect of what we do is we edit all of these videos, and unfortunately, we don't get the final say. We have to work with our creative team and the directors and the writers to get their feedback, hear what they think, if what we're editing matches their intention, and how we fix problems. And a lot of times we are sitting with them, whether it's Matt Hullum or Josh Flanagan or Blaine Gibson or Daniel Fabello, and getting their notes, and it's a collaborative process. So do any of you guys have thoughts on how that teamwork flows together?
As an editor, you need to, bring your touch to the piece overall, but you got to listen to the director and you got to listen to their vision. And so sometimes the note-taking process can be a little frustrating for an editor because you're working hard to try and make something work, and then the director can come in and be like, that's not working, and you're like, oh, I've just tried to make this work for 4 days and it's not working. And so you have to take that feedback and not take it personally. You have to kind of look at it and be like, okay, what can I do to make it work? Or if it's not working, maybe I should abandon what I'm trying to do, so.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting because our editorial team is so familiar with the footage, and a lot of times the director or writer hasn't seen it since they were on set. And so in their mind, they captured this amazing shot, this great take, nobody flubbed their lines, and you guys are looking at it over and over again to find this shot that doesn't exist, and you guys are frequently making it
Yeah.
with your edits.
A lot of times you have to show them when something doesn't work. You can't just tell them,
Right.
oh, that's not going to work because this or that. A lot of times you just have to put it together as scripted as it was shot and be like, okay, here it is. Like, that's the rough cut or assembly phase. You show them what they shot and as it's scripted, and then they can see for themselves if it works or if it doesn't.
Right, and like it's interesting to that point because we are so familiar with the footage, but also like the director's like a pair of fresh eyes, which is actually super important. Where if like you've been staring at this footage for like 8-10 hours every day, and you're just like, I have no perspective on what this thing is anymore. It is good to have somebody be like, well, let's try this, because sometimes you can be like, oh no, there's no way that would work, and then like drop it in like, oh okay, yeah, like let's keep going that direction. So.
Right.
I think also said something like last year about like it's good to kind of have like multiple points of view and kind of understand how like the different directions the video can take, because like you need to both understand like what the director might be going for and switch kind of to like their vision, but it's also good to kind of have something like as Cody was saying, like of your own to bring to the table. So that's been my experience, at least.
Yeah, I would say like editors are a great mix of like solitary workers, but then great collaborators too. I think that like you've got to have a really good mix of like your creatives, what you bring to the table creatively, but then also be really technical with some of these certain things. So I feel like editors are a really good balance of a lot of different things. And when working with a director, you constantly have to basically like maybe bring something to the table that wasn't discussed in pre-production or something like that, and just kind of like present an idea, just a first pass, a rough cut, and then get some feedback on that. And it can be tough. Maybe it's completely wrong from what they had envisioned, or maybe it feels too much like this and you got to go back. But that's all part of the process. You gotta work through that with someone else. So it's solitary, but it is also really collaborative too. So you can't do it all yourself. You must work with somebody, whether it's a client or whether it's a producer or a director. There's always somebody else who's got stake in a project, and you've got to work with them to be successful in this business.
So let's talk more about, you touched on this, Dan. What is an editor? You guys, because I'm lucky and because Rooster Teeth does this, are more than editors in the standard sense. You guys are doing, kind of tip to tail, you're finishing things, you're doing everything outside of that. But I want you to tell me what you think the role of an editor is, expand a little bit more on what Dan just said, and then talk about maybe some of the things that you guys do beyond your editor roles.
Maybe David could get into some of this too, but like when it starts, like it isn't just edited, like this footage, it's like a data management process and a delivery process too. So David, you want to talk a little bit about like how projects start, like when you receive footage and stuff like that?
Yeah. So normally whenever we get all the footage in, it's a mess. Sometimes there's a lot of footage, and so my job is to organize it, to make it so that whoever opens it, whether it's Cody or Adam or Dan, they know where to start. And so normally I will bring it into whichever NLE of choice, whether it's X or Premiere, whichever they prefer, and I'll bring it in. And usually whenever we most of our shows have a dual audio system, so I'll have to sync the audio. And sometimes if it's like immersion, which has like 20 cameras, I'll also have to multicam it. And so it's a lot of footage that has to go through, and sometimes it'll take a little while, but once I sync it or multicam it, I'll rename it, because whenever it comes from the camera, it'll have all these camera names, which means nothing in the end. So I'll have to rename it to, so that when they see this clip, if it's a close-up of Blaine humping a desk, I have to make
which
that
it often
clear.
is.
Which it often is, and so I have to make it clear. Yeah, and so they have to see that file name and know, okay, that's a close-up of Blaine humping. All right. Yeah, and so once I have all those renamed, I'll then string it all out so that the editor can then watch it. So that this is actually in Premiere, because X doesn't really have that need that feature. But in Premiere, I'll string out everything so that they can just watch it from beginning to end so that they can see everything. And if there's time, and sometimes if production has a script note, there'll be some notes and some takes that the director already likes. I'll then select those and then make a sequence called select sequence, which will show only the shots that the director likes. And then after that, it's normally in a good point where I can hand it off to the editors, and then they can get going and actually do their edits.
And in those string outs, usually David will cut everything in the clip from action to cut. So,
Yeah.
and a lot of times when they're on set, they run takes in series, so they don't really cut between takes. They'll run a take and then give a little direction and then run another take. They might do 5 takes all in one clip, because that's digital filmmaking nowadays, I guess.
Right, and yeah, sometimes like a clip is 10 minutes, but really if you look at it, it's 9 minutes of prepping, 9 minutes of them doing whatever, and then that last minute is really what they want. And so I'll go in and I'll just cut all that 9 minutes out so that no one needs to see that.
That doesn't exist.
That doesn't exist. No one needs to know.
And when that project's all prepared, the editor will usually take that, and hopefully we've had some conversation with the director or the producer to get on the same page of what we want to, what they have in mind, whether it should feel really tense or whether this should be really funny or something like that. But you basically take it from the script, to the timeline. And there are some challenges with that too. A lot of times there are some unnecessary things on the timeline, and you don't really find that out until you've laid it all out. Maybe, there are some jokes that just don't work, and maybe you want to format the structure differently. You want to put the end at the beginning, but those are all sorts of things that you find out once you start editing. So the editor's role, to get back to Allison's question, is really to just kind of like be this conduit between, you evaluate the footage, your fresh eyes on it, and you work this footage and you communicate with the director. You try to make it in their vision, but you really just try to make it work the best that it can.
Yeah, I think an editor gives it another look. I think there are plenty of people out there that write, direct, and edit their own stuff. And while some people may be great at that, I think having another set of eyes on it is always going to be a better idea, because they can bring something else to the project that one single person cannot. And so I think that's one thing an editor can do to elevate something, is get another set of eyes on it. And a lot of times whenever I'm working on something, I like to think outside the box. And so first I'll go through an assembly that is by script, that is exactly how everything was planned to do. And then I might have an idea of like, oh, this could be done differently. And so I might copy that sequence to not lose my previous work, and then try something like that was off the script. And sometimes those work and sometimes those don't. And that's one thing you go through with the director, is like, hey, I've tried this thing that was kind of not planned, and check it out. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and you have to be okay with him saying, this sucks, don't use this, and kind of talk through it, I guess.
Right, and alternatively, like directors need to be okay saying, like, we worked really hard on this shot, I'd like to include it, but editors might just be like, look, man, it doesn't work, we don't need it, so
right.
let's leave it behind and just move on. So it is collaborative, and the editor really does bring a fresh perspective to it to try to make it work in the timeline.
Mm-hmm. And I have fought for things before. If I'm like, if I made something that I think really works and the director comes in and he's like, I don't like this, there have been times where I've been like, hey, I really think it works. And they're like, nah, I'm not sure. And I'm like, yeah, really, I think it's better. And it's just like, sometimes there's got to be some convincing. Maybe they'll show it to someone else, and it can be a process kind of like that too.
Well, I want to keep talking about this, but I want to talk about it in regards to 11 Little Roosters. That was one of the biggest shows that we've worked on as a department since I've been part of the department. It was 8 episodes that were all about 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes. And sitting at this table has touched it in some capacity. and let's start by checking out a little reel from it. Actually put that together for us. It was great, right?
Yeah, David.
Does anyone want to jump in there, or you want a question? Because it's a lot. That was the biggest thing that we've worked on as a team.
Mm-hmm.
It was the most shooting days. It was the most talent. It had 2 directors, not just one, so notes that contradicted themselves.
Yes.
And a big release, including a game that went with it and some other content and all sorts of fun stuff. David, do you?
And just to let you guys know how big it was I don't know if you know storage size, but it was roughly 6 terabytes worth of footage. Yeah.
Those are the series takes I was talking about.
Yeah.
Where let's just not cut. Let's just keep rolling.
So, I mean, David, do you want to talk to us a little bit about how you would prep a project like that? Because that was not shot in order. It was shot scene by scene based on talent availability and locations, and that is a much bigger project than something we normally do, which is like a short that is shot in one place.
Yeah, and so that project was, for me personally, it was the biggest project I have had to work on by myself. Like I've worked in big projects before, but I've had a team of other assistants, but this is my first one by myself, handling 6 terabytes worth of footage. And so it was just a lot of just staying organized. Just I had a few spreadsheets that I would every day I'd get footage. I would check like, okay, on this day, this is what was shot, and so I would keep track of all of the days they were shot and what was shot each of those days. So at the end, I'll be like, okay, they shot all of episode 1, all of episode 2. They still need another scene for episode 3 that they have not shot yet, and so I can tell the editor who was working on it, hey, scene 3 of episode 3 hasn't been shot yet, but it will be soon, and so they're aware of it, so they're not scrambling to find that shot. And so it was just a lot of just keeping organized and just doing what I normally do, is just organizing, syncing, and then just getting that ready for the editor as soon as I can. And my goal for that particular project was that have a 2-day turnaround. So the day they shot it, the next day I prepped it, the next day the editor could touch it. And because they shot for how many? It was 20 days. And so that was my goal, was that every 2 days they could get footage ready to go. And so that was a big ordeal, but I was able to get it done. The editors were able to get it, and then in the end it looked great. So
Yeah, David made this awesome Google Doc that was like showed what had been shot and what had been prepped and what had not been shot yet. And so there was no question, like we didn't have to bother him and say, hey, David, like where's this footage? We could just look at the Google Doc and like know whether or not it's available. And
yeah, David, I've worked with David for many years, and he's probably the best. I'll just say definitively, he is the best assistant editor in town.
Yeah, David.
And
yeah, David.
If you want to know what it takes to be an assistant editor, and I highly recommend if you're just getting into this business that you start at that assistant level, that you talk with David after this is all through, and pick his brain a little bit, because he is definitely like been battle hardened, and he's been through it, and he's invaluable to our team. So
Did you guys have any specific thoughts about working on 11 Little Roosters? I'm going to talk about the VFX for 11 Little Roosters in a minute here, but before we get into that, did you guys have any thoughts about the fact that Dan was cutting one episode and Cody was cutting another, and you wanted them to feel like they were part of the same series, even though you guys are 2 different editors and have 2 different styles and had 2 directors and all that?
We had a meeting with Josh and Blaine before we started cutting the whole thing, and the biggest question was what's the feel of this show? Like, what's this supposed to be? Is it a goofy comedy, or is it taking itself seriously? What kind of music are we using? Like, what should we be thinking about when we're cutting it? And so that helped us all get on the same page as how to cut it, because obviously like a goofy slapstick comedy is going to be cut a little differently than something that takes itself seriously. And we cut this as more of something that takes itself seriously, but has just funny things happening in it.
Yeah. So I think the music is all pretty serious. There may be some examples where it's not, but like that was sort of a thing, we had a meeting about that, and then really that started to come through as we started to edit. So like as episode 1 got locked, I'd pass that information on, like here's some tracks that really worked for this. And I think we really hit our stride in a lot of series do, like in episode 3 and 4, just kind of like nailing that down and making it really efficient. But ultimately, like I feel like it was a good, we kept communication lines open between editors, and directors are obviously there to like steer an episode where it needs to go. It was, I will say, that wasn't all like really simple, because like there were 2 directors on it, and both directors may have had a different vision of how a scene should play. So there's a little friction there, but I think ultimately we ended up with a product that everybody felt really good about and worked really well. So and that's like part of the process. There are sometimes when there are a lot of people who have stake in a project, and you've got to get buy-in from everybody so everybody feels really good about it. And sometimes some ideas work and they just kind of work, and if you were opposed to that idea and it works, you just kind of let it go. So ultimately I do think we ended up with a really fun project. There was a really awesome game component to it too that a lot of people really enjoyed, and really kept editors on their toes as far as like how to play that. And also that was one of the big projects, like we hit up André a lot for VFX. He really adds a lot of value to the shorts that we do, but this was one where we really counted on him to just like make certain scenes really work. Like you saw on that thing, the Chris falling off the rafters scene, it was just, it just would, before André got here, those were things that we did ourselves, and I would say that we
gave to André while he was
right.
in Chicago.
But like those weren't things that we could really pull off, and I do think we'll get into a little bit of this too. But like we are all kind of jack of all trades, but like our motion graphics and our VFX skills kind of like reach a point, and that's where André takes over and just makes it something way better. So
Right.
I think that's a good segue into his reel.
I think so. Unfortunately for his reel, we're going to have to cut the Twitch feed if we can.
I cannot do that stuff.
André, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do on the day-to-day and how you work with these guys? And
Sure. I mean, Dan's definitely exaggerating. But
No,
yeah,
No.
He's not.
that's a pretty good slice of the past year or so of work I've done for Rooster Teeth, minus like the other 50% of the work, which is just gunshots and blood splats and that kind of thing. But yeah, like it really depends project to project. We usually have a pretty quick turnaround time in post for VFX. Spreadsheets have been like the unsung hero, where it's the same kind of thing with the LR. It was, I'd have a list of shots that I needed to do, and I would know if they were ready, and the editors could look at that and they could see if I'd made an export for it or not, and then we could know if it was finally approved. And the whole time I'm not waiting all week for a shot, not aware that it's already there. And same with the editors, they're not waiting for something knowing that, or not knowing that it's already been exported. And so the VFX work that I do is kind of split like 50-50 between a lot of cleanup stuff and then a lot of the really fancy like heads exploding and things like that. And I think a reel of cleanup stuff would be kind of interesting, but also really boring to watch, because if it's working well, you have no idea that it's happened. So there's a lot of things where we're removing wires, we're removing rigs, we're doing green screen work, which kind of falls in between.
You know what shot that I don't think was on there was the $1 million butt where Bernie's knees
Oh, the backwards
went
legs.
backwards.
Yeah.
Did anyone see that one?
So it was a scenario where it was actually from RTX Australia,
Yes.
RTX Sydney, and they did a live MDB, and I think one of the audience members proposed it. But it was that every time you bent backwards or you kneeled down, your knees went backwards. It was just a weird Velociraptor knees kind of scenario.
Or
And-
kangaroo, from Australia.
I guess, are their knees backwards?
I don't think.
Damn it. You're so confident that no.
But
so
anyway.
I believe you.
But yeah, so and that one was tough because there was a lot of wide shots of them bending down, and it was one of those things where like it took way longer than we thought, because when you first do it, it looks so alien and weird, and then it's a matter of you got to try and figure out how to still make that work, but also make it feel a little bit less like, oh my God, this entire thing was completely faked. Like there's a small aspect of trying to make it real. So that was an interesting one. I mean, talking to David Strengths too on ELR, like that Chris falling shot, that was something I knew was going to be a big thing, and we had a pretty quick turnaround for each of those episodes in terms of post. It was like maybe a week, if at most 2 weeks for VFX stuff. But I knew that shot was going to be so much, so I think like the day after we were on set for it, I came to David and I was like, David, can you just like pick out some of those, and I'll just start picking my favorite ones, and we'll just use those. And this was like maybe when episode 3 was in progress, and episode 6 was the one that the Chris Falling was in. So sometimes it's helpful to know ahead of time how much you're going to need to work on something.
I will say it's been very helpful. We've started including André in a lot of pre-production meetings,
Yeah.
and Andre's been able to weigh in on how to shoot something for visual effects, how to make it be able to work later on, to have it look the most natural, and to have it be efficient, so
Yeah.
that André doesn't have to recreate something.
It's definitely, I think that's almost one of my favorite parts of working full-time for Rooster Teeth, is being involved in every part of that process now, because we're in the pre-production meetings and we're talking about, can we do this practical? Can we do this with VFX? Does it make sense? And then on set being like, okay, is this how we should shoot it? Can we approach it this way? Maybe we do a couple different things and the director chooses our favorite. And then, 80% of the time I'm working on it in post. But before I was working full time, it was just, here's the stuff that we shot. We need this to work. Thanks.
So VFX, I think, and you guys might feel differently, kind of falls between editorial and finishing, because it is kind of that special piece that finalizes a cut, that makes you able to lock a cut. And then after we lock a cut, we go into finishing. And for finishing, let's start with talking about color. And I think Dan is has done some great talks for us about DaVinci Resolve. That's one of the programs that we use to color. And I'm going to let him show you a color reel and talk about color.
Yeah, before we get started, I just want to say, like, I'm not the only editor here who does the color. Every editor here has contributed to this color reel, and a guy who's not actually in the room, but he was sitting over there, and you should talk to him after. I think he's coming back. His name is Joe Ash. He's pretty shy, but he is really got a good eye for color, and I am always picking his brain on what looks good. So he really helps elevate the live action product. We did get some training as a group in DaVinci Resolve, which I'd recommend every editor here kind of get familiar with. It's a free program to use, but it really has helped up the production value of our products. And not that every editor has to know everything about color and finishing, but I do think it helps increase the production value of your project. And it's, once you get a hang of it, it's relatively simple to use, and I think every editor here would agree. It's really helped elevate our products. So let's show the reel, and then we'll talk briefly about it, because I know we got a few more things to get through, and I want to get some questions too. A lot of that stuff, like, it looks pretty decent in camera, but once you work it through that program, it just adds this little extra polish to it, and I think that it really does elevate the quality of the whole thing. And there are some things, like, oftentimes we're just enhanced shots, but in some ways too we can help the story out too. There was a shot with James, and he's supposed to be like in Bernie's apartment, Bernie Bernadiccio for ELR. And he's supposed to be in front of a fire, and it's at night, but they shot that during the day. And it's really easy to use that program to do a day for night sort of thing. And I would say check out the program. If you're around later and want to pick our brains about it, happy to do that, but we'll just move on for now. But check it out. It has helped our team a lot, I think.
Yeah, ELR was a great example of using color. We also had flashback scenes with Joel and Aaron that made great use of color. And while we're talking about ELR, there were also some 360 videos that were cut for 11 Little Roosters. I'm not sure if you guys saw any of them, either on a VR headset or on YouTube. And I'd love for Adam and maybe Cody to take us through what it's like to work with 360 video.
All right, I got a couple of videos to kind of show you what like the interface looks like, kind of differently on both. This is Premiere. I don't know, Cody, did you get a chance to work on a lot of this with this?
I did the 360 stuff in.
God, I can't believe we're actually following SSB on the world
So yeah,
tour.
as you can see, like when you're editing like 360 VR in Premiere, first off, that was also this is 3D, so that's why you have the two videos like stacked on top of each other.
Send free tickets as their targets, and they assassinate
And then
live.
you can there's a free plugin. It's by Dashwood Studios, and you basically just install that in, and it like just integrates with Premiere, and you can click the button, drag around, and just basically watch it back. Watch back what somebody else will be seeing with like their headset in live action. And the thing about like editing this kind of stuff is that you don't do a whole lot of actual editing. You just basically like, oh, I like this take, and you just lay it out there. And so the real challenge kind of comes in like sound editing. So just give like an example. It's like we've got
Best show ever!
this is what it sounds like after we're all done. But if you go back and kind of take out like some of the sound design,
Sexy, grandma, sexy.
you guys see there's a lot missing.
Best show ever!
That's what we were doing. Want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I
While
think
coding?
there was a short with Marshall and John that we did in 360, and that was actually a pretty creative way to use some editing for actually cutting, like making some cuts, because with 360 it's basically you're using one take, and the way we used cuts here was you're the camera as a hostage, and so to get from one location to the other, they would put like a pillowcase over the camera, which would be your head, so you can't see where you're going, and then you end up at a different location, and so that's where we kind of mask the cuts. There are probably some other ways that you can mask a cut. If you really controlled your environment, you could probably mask some areas of the frame and make some cuts that way, but that takes some serious planning, and this was way easier than doing that.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to talk about how sound design, I can speak, helps with that? Because when it's a 360 video, where do you look?
Exactly. There's actually like a part of that process that we aren't in control of, but we send out to like an audio professional to take care of for us, and that is actually the panning of it. It's really cool where they basically we give them all the individual sound effects and the different layers for sound, and they will pan each layer based on which direction you're supposed to be looking. So they have like basically quadrants of like, well, this sound effect is taking place back here, and this people talking are taking place over here. So that way, when you actually are loading it up in like a VR or 360 view, or when you turn, the stereo will pan with you, so you're kind of paying attention to whoever is like right in front of you.
It's like stereoscopic sound, I think is.
Yeah. I think that's probably
What
one of the
they call
coolest
it.
parts about actually working with VR, even though we don't get to
Yeah.
do it, just kind of getting to see that process.
Yeah, and instead of using cuts to guide the viewer to where they should be looking, we're using audio instead. And so that's why audio, sound mix is such a big deal for 360 because what directs the viewer to where they should be looking.
And also, Allison, I know that we were going to do some like stuff with like sound effects next, but I think if we want...
Well, we've got about 15 minutes left, so
Yeah.
I'd like to open it up to questions
Yeah.
at this point. And if nobody has questions, or if there are extra questions and you would rather talk to us after the panel, there you are.
I will
Hi.
say sound too is a really good way to communicate with André. When you send André a shot to do, maybe it's got a lot of gun noises, but the muzzle flashes aren't in yet, so he can kind of like sync that up. Or if we're cutting someone's head off and the sound of a head hitting the floor, or the knife going through the head extends a certain way. He just kind of knows to do that too. Sound design is really important and also really elevates the quality of the product that we put out.
It is, and that's one of those things.
In an
that
MDB too, and Adam works really hard to do. Like they don't shoot all of that with sound, so like the stuff that he creates, I think he's got a screenshot of some of that too. Like if you check this out, you'd be kind of amazed, like the work that he puts into making a scene like this work. You know, like they don't record it. It doesn't even sound like this. Go ahead and play.
Yeah. That was 6 seconds, and that was just all the sound right there. And I have it written down that there, because I didn't record that on set, and we didn't have like the opportunity to like actually go out and record somebody walking around in armor, I had to try to find a bunch of metal sound effects from our like libraries that we have. And I think that's in that 6 seconds, there's 55 different like individual audio clips that are layered in there. Later, there's like a scene where he's running through a grocery store, and I can just pull up my timeline for that. Yeah, that's 140 sound effects. There's a bunch of things that are layered in there that you don't see all the 140. And I think I downloaded about 208 different metal sound effects. So there's when you're doing sound, there's a lot of layering. Like if you don't have access to somebody who can do Foley, or you don't have like the super big, awesome like Hollywood sound effects libraries, which if you're just starting out, you don't. A lot of the stuff you can probably do on Freesound. We use a couple of things called audio blocks, and I also grab a lot of stuff from a place called Epidemic Sound. But yeah, just layers upon layers upon layers of audio, and pitch shift and timing and a bunch of other stuff, and you can make pretty much anything work. So yeah.
The short story is nobody sitting at this table just does one job. They do a lot of things to make this content be as amazing as it can possibly be. Given just a script and some video, they go above and beyond. And if anyone has some questions for the brilliant mind sitting next to me, we would love to take them.
Do we have a mic in the audience?
We do.
Can you go on about how brilliant we are?
You can have questions for Allison too. It's fine.
No, I'm just here to make this panel look good.
All right, we got about 10 minutes. Let's get some questions
Yeah.
in.
Just
Go ahead.
get started.
I guess we should choose, right?
Hi. So outside of just editing projects over and over again, is there something that we can do to make ourselves better editors?
That's a really good question. Who wants to take it?
I'll start at the high level and say probably try to collaborate with some other people and have other people be part of your work so you can experience what it's like to work on things outside of your own, but I'll let some of the editors actually answer.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think collaborating with other people who give you a different perspective on your work, like a lot of times I submit some work and I'm like, I don't see how this could be cut any differently. And then I get some feedback that's like, it could be cut a lot differently. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's humbling, but it's also, you kind of got to be open to those ideas too, to be like, oh, I kind of see what they're saying. So maybe I can work this a little differently and make it work for everybody here. So I would say collaboration is pretty key to that.
If you've gotten to the point where you know what you want to edit, then yeah, definitely that. But also, like, dabbling a little bit in shooting or dabbling a little bit in directing or like other roles in production will kind of help give you an idea of what it's like to shoot or what it's like to try to direct. So like, you know what they were going for when they were shooting or when they were directing or whatever.
I'll also say that these guys are very well-rounded. Our content is a mix of reality and scripted and things that fall in between. So maybe try to do some of each. You know, they work on comedy, that's a niche, but, you know, maybe try something that's more drama or try a documentary style. And, you know, there's all different types of content that you can edit, and they all require different skill sets.
Cool. More questions? So like, right over there. Can't come up first. Or never mind.
Right.
Just let him.
So I am a thriller editor and I struggle with comedy. What are some tips that you can give to me so I can get that comedy hit? Because I can't get the punchline.
You just have to make it funny.
Yeah. You got to take something that's not there and make it funny. These guys do it every day. I can't tell you how, but
Comedy's all about timing. You just have to try it different ways and different timing and watch it with people and see when they laugh and see when they don't. You know, there is that rule of threes in comedy where usually after the third time it's not funny anymore. Like if you have a running gag after 3 times, it's not funny. I mean, there are plenty of like rules of comedy, and for the most of the time it's like they're pretty on, but you can go outside the rules of comedy. Like,
yeah, I mean, I'd say there's also like different types of comedy, so it's about also knowing like what the tone you're kind of going for is, because some like to play it like straight and like it's like the absurdity of that that's funny. Sometimes it's just like a straight up joke. So yeah, I mean, I agree. Timing is really everything with that. So with that, maybe also just watch more, watch a bunch of comedies and try to get a feel for that. It's kind of hard. At the same time, like if you know thrillers, like there's pacing for that too, where like you're trying to like scare somebody or like make somebody interesting, or have suspense. So I think there is actually a crossover between the different styles of editing where you can kind of be like, okay, well, I'm going to pace this joke like this because I want like this information or this joke to land here. So it's almost like a scare. What would be a scare in a horror is now like the joke in a comedy. I guess if that makes sense to you guys. So.
You can go big on the comedy like Three Stooges, like wacky, like goofy, like whoop whoop, like sound effects and all that. Right. Or you can go with like The Naked Gun, which is a film that I love because it's like everything is serious, but what they do and what they say is so like out there that it's funny. Like Leslie Nielsen wasn't supposed to be a comedy actor; he was a dramatic actor. But the way that he would say these lines in such a serious tone, but they were so like ridiculous, is what made that funny.
And some of that has to do with the footage you're getting too. Like we work a lot with some footage that just doesn't work, and we try to leave it behind and move on to what does. So I would say like these guys are kind of right with the timing, and maybe you can make it awkward and maybe that's funny. I don't know your specific situation, but like I would say you just kind of work it until it is, and if it isn't, you leave it behind.
Watch other comedies and see how they do it.
Yeah, next.
So when you're talking about ELR, you were mentioning like getting all the music correct and getting like the right tracks. Do you ever just work with the musician who's supposed to be writing the music for your project, so you can like, the scene's supposed to be a serious scene, so do this serious music or stuff like that?
We actually use some music libraries, so we don't often work with a composer. There are some exceptions. Since we last talked too, we did the RVB live action show. In that, we used a composer because RVB uses a composer too, and that was a crossover collaboration between animation and live action. So we did have access to a composer, but all those tracks were kind of temped in beforehand. So a composer had an idea of what he wanted to what we had in mind, and we collaborated after that. So it's not often that we just kind of like cut a scene without, and there are some different approaches to editing too. Sometimes I've gone back and forth actually. When I started editing, I would just put a music track in and then cut to that, but you can't really get too attached to a music track because it might not work for a producer or a director or anything like that. So I would say, like it varies, but we try to remain as nimble as we can to swap out tracks or make adjustments as necessary. But I go back and forth whether I start with music or not, and it depends, I guess.
Sometimes a lot of the work that I do on a cut is in the music because I want the pacing to be like kind of with the video, but at the same time the music has to be there. And since we're working with tracks that are not composed, we're working with tracks that we're pulling from music websites or whatever. You just have to chop up this track to make it work to fit the pacing that you're trying to deal with.
Yeah, it's almost like the editor works as a composer too, which is kind of nice. A lot of us have music backgrounds, and we can kind of like have a feel for that. But
yeah, it helps if you know how to keep a track like on beat. So when you chop up that track, you're not just like jumbling the whole tempo, you know.
I will say that our creative team generally likes to look at cuts that have music in them already. And although we haven't worked with composers a lot, I think we're going to have some opportunities in the future. And from my understanding is that we would still put in music tracks so that they would understand the feeling, the vibe, the pace that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got time for, I think, at least one or two more questions.
And there's Joe Ash, too, by the way.
Oh, Joe Ash. That's our
I was talking about him earlier.
our great color guy. And John over there
and John,
also is
too.
on our team.
Yeah.
And he does color and he cuts RT Life,
And
which
Jason
are some
Baskin,
of the
too.
hardest to cut. And Jason works with long form live action on their post team, which does things like Day 5 and Laser Team.
So maybe one more, and then we'll stick around, too, if you guys want to chat. Like, no problem.
With the 360, what kind of 360 camera do you guys use, and what programs do you guys use to stitch it together before putting it into Premiere?
David,
David, go ahead.
Well, I guess for the 360s, we used two different cameras. For the hostage one that Cody did, we used the Samsung 360, the Samsung Galaxy One. But for ELR in particular, we were working in partnership with Google to use a camera. It was called the Odyssey, and that was something from Google. And so Google was the one that once we shot it, we gave them the footage, and they stitched it and gave it back to us. Yeah.
Adam, do you want to talk about the programs you use to edit?
Oh, we already talked about the programs used, like Premiere or. Yeah, Premiere or X both have something. I think we were showing the video earlier about like the.
We use the Dashwood plugin.
Dashwood, thank you.
We got time for one more?
I think we can do one more. One more? So this guy.
Maybe two more. Who knows?
We'll be here all day.
Who wants this?
Yeah.
So, what would you recommend? I'm trying to do some editing work. I'm like shooting and editing. What would you recommend for someone on a very limited budget? Like, are there any? I assume the softwares you've listed are somewhat expensive and have yearly fees. So, any like?
Actually, everything is getting cheaper.
Resolve is free.
Yeah, actually, we haven't really had a chance to experiment with it, but I really want to. Is DaVinci Resolve, and they have a free, like it's a freemium, so you can buy like an upgrade to it for what was it, $300, $400, but like the basic editing is there, and it's pretty good. I still need to kind of check it out. Premiere, you can actually get like Premiere for I think $15 to $20 per month. So I know like even still like on a budget, like that's not the best, but it'll do in a pinch.
But if you're on a per project basis, you can get Premiere for just a few months if you want to work on one project, or if you want to buy Final Cut, it's $300.
And I'd say too, like there are a lot of people in the community who want the experience of making stuff like that. So if you can get some collaborators who want to pitch in, you might find that you could crew up for little to nothing, maybe some bagels, and
Right.
you might find that there's a bagel shop that wants to donate some bagels.
There
for
might
a
be
mention
a
at the-
bagel shop too.
Yeah.
So I think if you're resourceful, you can find a way to do it. But I would not let money stand in your way. I think that'd be really tragic. Like if you've got the love for what I'll call it the game, you just find a way. And I'm sure you can do it.
And find some help. I mean, there are some other people out there that I'm sure that love to do the same things that you do. So find some people that are just as passionate as you are, because the more people that you have, the less time it'll take you, and time is money.
DaVinci Resolve. All right.
All right, guys, it's a little bit after 2, so I'm going to let you guys go. If you have other panels or escape rooms that you want to attend.
Thanks so much for coming out, guys.
Thanks, guys. We'll be around. We'll hang out.
We'll be right over here if you have other questions that we didn't get to.